She was sprinting through the rain when she saw it. Emily Carter's shoes were already soaked through. Her second shift at the diner had run 40 minutes late, and the last bus home had just pulled away from the curb in a cloud of diesel smoke. She was 3 blocks from the bus stop, coat pulled over her head, groceries banging against her knee, when her foot nearly came down on it, a slim dark wallet sitting in the middle of the wet sidewalk like it had been placed there deliberately, like the universe had decided tonight was the night to test her. She stopped. The rain hammered the pavement around her. A cab hissed past, headlights sweeping across the leather. It was the kind of wallet you didn't see often, not around this neighborhood anyway. Dark brown, structured with a small gold emblem on the corner that she didn't recognize but somehow knew meant money. Real money. Not the kind she scraped together every 2 weeks to cover rent and daycare and the electricity bill that had been sitting on her kitchen counter for 11 days with the word final stamped across the top in red. Emily picked it up. She stood there in the rain and opened it slowly, the way you open something you already know is going to change things somehow. She just didn't know yet whether it was going to change them for better or worse. Inside there were cards, black cards, platinum cards, a folded receipt from a restaurant she'd heard of but never been to, the kind of place where the menu didn't list prices, and cash thick, neat, pressed together like they'd just come from a bank. She didn't count it, she didn't need to. She could see the edges of several hundreds fanned out like a deck of cards, and something inside her chest went very still. 6 years old, that was how old Lily was. 6 years old, with a smile that could stop a room and a laugh that Emily lived for, and right now she was asleep 3 miles away at Mrs. Ockhaffer's apartment with one pair of good school shoes, a coat that was getting too small across the shoulders, and a school field trip permission slip that Emily hadn't been able to sign yet because the fee was $42, and she didn't have $42 until Thursday. Emily stood in the rain and stared at the cash. She thought about Thursday, she thought about the electricity bill, she thought about the look on Lily's face when all the other kids got on the bus for the field trip and Lily had to stay behind. She thought about how she hadn't bought herself a single new thing in almost 2 years, not one thing, not even a pair of socks that didn't have a small hole in the left heel. Then she closed the wallet. She didn't know exactly why she did it in the moment. It wasn't some grand, cinematic decision. It was quieter than that. It was just that when she imagined taking the money, she immediately imagined telling Lily about it someday, and she couldn't finish the sentence. She couldn't find a version of that story that she was proud of. And Emily Carter had very little left in her life that she was proud of, so she held on to the ones she had. She tucked the wallet into her coat pocket and walked the rest of the way home in the rain. Under the weak yellow light of her kitchen, she dried the wallet off with a dish towel and went through it more carefully. There were 3 credit cards, all in the same name. A gym membership, a folded business card, heavy stock, the kind that costs $1 each to print, with a single name embossed in dark ink, Derek Calloway. Below the name, a title, Founder and CEO, Calloway Group, and a website. She pulled out her phone and typed the name into the search bar. The results came back instantly. Derek Calloway, 38, self-made billionaire. Built his first company from a 2-bedroom apartment at 22, sold it at 26, and spent the next decade building an empire that now touched logistics, real estate, and technology across 4 continents. There were pictures, him shaking hands with heads of state, ringing opening bells at stock exchanges, standing at podiums in front of foundations that bore his name. He was handsome in the way that powerful men sometimes are, not movie star handsome but sharp, certain, the kind of face that belonged at the head of a table. There was also a profile piece from a business magazine, published about 8 months ago. She skimmed it. It talked about the Calloway Foundation, which apparently had poured over $200 million in education initiatives and community development programs across the country. It quoted people who worked for him. They used words like demanding and visionary and relentless, but also, buried near the end of the article, unexpectedly generous. Emily set the phone down, she looked at the wallet, she looked at the final notice on her kitchen counter. She made herself a cup of tea, sat at the table, and thought for a long time. Then she went to bed, and in the morning she called Mrs. Ockhaffer and asked if she could keep Lily for another few hours. The Calloway Group's offices were in a building downtown that she had walked past 100 times without really looking at it. One of those glass towers that existed in a different city than the one she moved through every day. She stood in front of it for a moment before going in, her coat dry now but still carrying a faint smell of last night's rain. The lobby was enormous and quiet and cool, with a desk staffed by 2 receptionists who looked at her with the practiced, polite blankness of people trained to assess visitors in under 3 seconds. "I'm here to return something to Mr. Calloway," Emily said. "A wallet, he lost it last night." The receptionist, young, precise, a small Bluetooth earpiece in one ear, looked at her for a moment. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't, I just have his wallet." There was a brief, quiet negotiation that Emily was not fully part of, conducted through the earpiece and a series of small expressions crossing the receptionist's face. Then she was asked to wait. She sat in a chair near the window and watched the city move outside and tried not to think about how out of place she looked. 12 minutes later, a different woman appeared, older, efficient, with the energy of someone who managed 17 things simultaneously and was irritated by none of them. "Ms. Carter, I'm Diane, Mr. Calloway's executive assistant. He'll see you now." Emily followed her into an elevator that rose without a sound and opened onto a floor that felt less like an office and more like a statement. Glass walls looking out over the city in 3 directions. A long conference table no one was sitting at. And at the far end, behind a desk that was almost aggressively minimalist, Derek Calloway. He was on the phone when she came in. He held up one finger not dismissively, almost apologetically, and finished the call in 30 seconds. Then he stood. "Ms. Carter," he came around the desk. He was taller than the photos suggested, and there was something in person that the pictures didn't quite capture, an attentiveness, a quality of actually looking at the person in front of him rather than through them. "Diane tells me you have something of mine." Emily reached into her coat and held out the wallet. He took it, turned it over in his hands. Something shifted very briefly in his expression, relief maybe, though it came and went so quickly she couldn't be sure. "Where did you find it?" "Corner of Marsh and 5th, on the sidewalk last night, around 11. He nodded slowly. "I was there for a dinner, must have fallen out." He looked up at her. "Did you open it?" She met his eyes. "Yes." "Then you saw what was inside?" "Yes." He watched her for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly, less formal, more direct. "Why didn't you take the cash?" Emily had expected the question, but not the way he asked it, without judgment and without performance, just genuinely curious, like it was a puzzle he actually wanted to understand. She felt her jaw tighten slightly and then release. "Because it wasn't mine," she said. "That's the whole reason. That's the whole reason." He studied her like he was deciding something. Then he said, "Can I offer you something? Coffee, water?" "I'm fine, I should get back, I have a daughter." 5 minutes, he said, not a demand, more like a request. "Please sit down." She didn't know exactly why she sat. Maybe because she was tired in a way that went beyond last night, a tiredness that lived in her bones now and came from years of running and scraping and holding everything together with both hands. Maybe because no one had said please to her in a while and actually meant it. She sat in the chair across from his desk, and he pulled his own chair around so he wasn't behind the desk anymore, and they were just 2 people in a room with a lot of glass and a lot of city behind them. "Marsh and 5th, he said. "That's a long way from here. Did you take the train?" "I walked." He looked at her. "That's 45 minutes. I know how long it is." He leaned back slightly in his chair and she couldn't quite read his expression. "What do you do, Ms. Carter?" Emily. "I work at Rourke's Diner on Clement, and I do a second shift 3 nights a week at the laundry service on Porter." He didn't react with pity, which she appreciated. He just absorbed the information. "And your daughter, how old is she?" 6, her name is Lily." Something moved across his face at that. He looked briefly away at the city, then back. "I want to give you a reward," he said. "A formal one. Whatever was in that wallet, I'll match it. You'd have earned it." "No. Emily." "I didn't return it for a reward. If I'd wanted a reward, I'd have called the number on the business card last night and negotiated one." She said it without heat but also without apology. "I returned it because it was the right thing to do. If I take money now, then what I did last night doesn't mean the same thing anymore. Does that make sense?" He was quiet for a moment. "It makes complete sense," he said. "It also makes you the most unusual person who's been in this office in a long time." She almost smiled at that. "I'm going to take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. Outside, 50 floors below, the city went about its business, completely indifferent to both of them. "Can I ask you something?" Derek said. "You can ask." "What's the hardest part of doing what you do, working 2 jobs, raising a daughter alone? What's the part that gets to you?" Emily looked at him carefully. It was not the question she expected. The math, she said finally, not the emotional stuff. That's hard, but I can handle hard. It's the math that keeps me up at night. There's always something that doesn't add up. A bill I can cover or a bill I can't. A field trip she can go on or one she can't. I'm always calculating and the numbers never quite work out, and I've been doing it for 6 years and she stopped. Tired, he said quietly. Yeah. He nodded. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back up at her. My mother raised my brother and me alone, he said. After my father left, she worked nights. I didn't understand what that cost her until I was much older. He paused. She never complained, not once. I used to think that was strength. Now I think it was more complicated than that. Emily said nothing. She could feel the weight of what he'd shared, and she didn't want to step on it. I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear me out before you say no, Derek said. I'm listening. I have a foundation. We run education and community development initiatives in 14 cities. I need a project coordinator for our local programs here, someone to liaise with community organizations, track program outcomes, manage relationships. It pays fairly, significantly more than 2 jobs at a diner and a laundry service. He held her gaze. And I'm not offering it because you returned my wallet. I'm offering it because in the 5 minutes you've been sitting in that chair, you've shown me more clarity and more backbone than most of the people I interview for positions twice as senior. Emily stared at him. Her first instinct, automatic, reflexive, was to say no. She felt the refusal rise in her throat and she pressed it down and made herself think. I don't have a degree, she said. The job description doesn't require one. I've never worked in a foundation. You've been managing scarce resources, navigating bureaucratic systems, and building relationships with institutions under pressure for 6 years. That's exactly the experience I need. You're serious. I'm always serious about hearing. She pressed her fingers together in her lap, and this isn't charity. No, he said, it's a job. You'd work for it. You'd be held accountable for outcomes. If you're not good at it, Diane will have a very professional and somewhat uncomfortable conversation with you about it. He said it without humor and then, a moment later, with the faintest edge of it. She's very good at that conversation. Emily looked out at the city. She thought about Lily. She thought about the math that never added up. She thought about the version of herself that had walked 45 minutes through the morning carrying a wallet full of someone else's money and never once seriously considered keeping it, not really, not in the way that would have required looking herself in the mirror afterward and explaining it. She thought about what it would mean to let something good happen. I'll need to think about it, she said. Of course. And I'd want to understand the actual terms before I agree to anything. Completely reasonable. And I'm not going to be grateful in a way that makes me a pushover. If I take this job, I work it like a job. He almost smiled. I would expect nothing less. She stood. They shook hands and his grip was firm and quick, the handshake of someone who meant what he said. She thanked him for his time, not for the offer, just for his time, and walked back to the elevator with Diane and rode down 50 floors to the lobby and out into the city. She walked 2 blocks before she stopped on the sidewalk and just stood there for a moment, not crying, just breathing while the world moved around her. She called Mrs. Ockhaffer. Can you keep Lily 1 more hour, she asked. I need to sit somewhere quiet and think. She found a coffee shop 2 streets over, ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, and sat at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a paper cup and thought about her life with the kind of focus she usually reserved for urgent things. She thought about risk and pride, and what it meant to accept help, and whether there was a version of this that she could look Lily in the eye and explain. She thought about the look on Derek Calloway's face when he said his mother worked nights and never complained, and how he'd said it wasn't strength, it was more complicated. She understood that. She understood it more than she'd expected to understand anything said to her by a billionaire in a glass tower. She called him back that afternoon. Diane answered and put her through. I have questions, Emily said. Ask them. She asked 7 questions in the order she'd written them down on a napkin. He answered each one without deflecting or softening. When she was done, there was a pause. Any others, he said. Not right now. Then I'll have Diane send you the formal offer letter tomorrow morning. Review it, have someone look at it if you want. I will. Emily. Yeah. For what it's worth, I've been doing this a long time. Building things, hearing people, trying to figure out who's real and who isn't. It's harder than it sounds. A pause. Last night someone found my wallet in the rain with a lot of cash in it, walked 45 minutes to return it, and then told me no when I tried to pay her for it. That doesn't happen. That hasn't happened to me in a very long time, if ever. Another pause, shorter. I just wanted to say that." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "I'll read the letter." She hung up and sat in the coffee shop a little longer, watching the street through the window, thinking about what it felt like when one ordinary decision, not even a dramatic one, just the quiet choice to do what was right instead of what was easy, began to pull the future in a different direction. The offer letter arrived the next morning, precise and detailed, exactly as he described. She read it 3 times. She had Mr. Patterson at the community center, who had a law degree he no longer practiced, look it over. He read it carefully, looked up at her and said, "Emily, this is legitimate. This is a good offer." He said it the way people say things they want to make sure you're actually hearing. She signed it that afternoon. 3 weeks later, she walked into the Calloway Foundation's regional office on her first day of work, wearing the one blazer she owned that still fit well, Lily's drawing of the two of them folded in her inside pocket for luck. The office was warm and busy and full of people who seemed to have a reason to be there, and her desk had her name on a small card. And when she sat down and opened her laptop and saw her name in the email system, Emily Carter, project coordinator, she had to look away at the wall for a moment and collect herself. She didn't cry, she almost did, but she'd learned a long time ago how to hold things together when they needed holding, and some habits ran deep. 6 months after that, she was standing in the back of a gala at the Meridian Hotel when Derek Calloway stepped up to the podium at the front of the room. The hall was full of people in expensive clothes who had given large checks to be there, and the light was warm and golden. And somewhere across town, Lily was at home with Mrs. Acaffer and a new book she'd picked out herself at the school library, a library that Emily could now confirm Lily would be attending with a full scholarship for the next 8 years. Derek adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the room and then, briefly, his gaze moved to the back to where Emily stood with a glass of sparkling water, and he nodded once. She nodded back. "I want to tell you about a Tuesday night," he said into the microphone, and the room went quiet. "A rainy Tuesday night about 6 months ago when I did something careless and lost my wallet. And a woman who was exhausted from a double shift, who was already stretched thin in every way that matters, found it on a sidewalk." He paused. "She didn't take the cash she could have. She needed it more than I did, if we're being honest." A soft, knowing sound moved through the crowd. She returned it. "Walked 45 minutes to my office to return it. And then, when I offered her a reward, she told me no. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, that if she took money for it, then what she'd done wouldn't mean the same thing anymore." He let that sit in the room for a moment. "I've spent a lot of time in rooms like this one," he continued, "talking about integrity and purpose and values. Those words get used a lot in places like this. They can start to feel like decoration, like they belong on a wall somewhere, framed." Another pause. "But there are people for whom those things are not decoration. For whom integrity is the decision you make at 11 o'clock at night, in the rain, when no one is watching, when the easier choice is right there in your hands, and the harder choice costs you nothing except the chance to do something small and dishonorable that would make the next week a little easier." His voice was steady and even. "I want to be more like those people. And I think this foundation at its best is trying to build a world where those people don't have to choose between integrity and survival." The applause started before he'd fully stepped back from the microphone. Emily stood at the back of the room and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, not happiness exactly, or not only happiness, but something more textured than that. Something that had room in it for all the hard years and all the quiet choices and all the mornings she'd gotten up and done the math again and come up short and done it again anyway. Something that felt, more than anything else, like the right ending to a story she'd been living through without being sure how it would come out. On the cab ride home that night, she texted Mrs. Acaffer that she was 20 minutes away. Then she looked out the window at the lit-up city, the same city she'd always lived in, the same streets, the same lights, and she thought about Lily asleep at the kitchen table with her library book open under her cheek. Which was something Lily did with books she liked, fell asleep inside them like she wanted to stay. She thought about the field trip permission slip, signed now, tucked in Lily's backpack with $42 in an envelope, plus a little extra for the gift shop. She thought about the wallet on the wet sidewalk and the moment she'd picked it up, and all the small, invisible architecture of choices that had followed from that one moment like a river from a spring. She thought about what Derek had said at the podium, that integrity was the choice you made when no one was watching. And she thought, yes, but also sometimes someone is watching, even if you don't know it. Sometimes the world has its eye on you in the ordinary moments, in the tired moments, in the moments that feel like they don't count. And sometimes those are exactly the moments that count the most. The cab pulled up to her building. She paid the driver, tipped him $3 more than she needed to, not because she was rich, she wasn't, not close, but because she could, finally, and because she remembered what it was to need $3 extra, and she went inside. Lily was asleep on the couch, not at the table. The book was closed this time, held against her chest with both hands, the way you hold something you're not ready to put down. Emily stood in the doorway and looked at her daughter for a long moment, the way parents do when children are sleeping and the world has gone quiet enough to really see them. Then she crossed the room, lifted Lily gently, carried her to bed, pulled the blanket up, kissed her forehead. "I've got you," she whispered, "I've got you." And for the first time in 6 years, the math worked out. If this story moved you at all, if you felt something in Emily's moment on that sidewalk, or in the quiet way she chose hard over easy, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit the like button, leave a comment telling us what you think Emily's most courageous moment was, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We read every comment, every single one. See you in the next one.